You thought trading would be difficult. You prepared for that. You expected learning curves. You expected losses. You expected setbacks. You bought the courses. You studied the charts. You practiced the strategies. You told yourself you were ready for the challenge. But there was a challenge nobody warned you about. Not the technical one, the psychological one. The one that does not show up in backtests. The one that is not covered in strategy guides. The one that arrives not when the market moves against you, but when you realize how many times you are going to move against yourself. The hesitation before valid trades, the doubt during drawdowns, the frustration after losses you knew were coming but still felt. The exhaustion of maintaining discipline session after session after session with no guarantee of when consistency will arrive. The loneliness of a profession where you sit alone with decisions that feel enormous and an account that reflects every psychological weakness you have ever had. You expected to learn a skill. What trading actually asks of you was something far deeper. It asked you to confront yourself, your impatience, your ego, your fear, your need for control, your inability to tolerate uncertainty, your tendency to break under pressure. And most traders, prepared for the technical challenge and completely unprepared for the psychological one, find that confrontation overwhelming. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack dedication, because they underestimated what trading really asks of them. In this video, we are going to examine exactly what that psychological cost looks like, why the effort equals reward model breaks down completely in trading, and what the shift looks like from a trader trying to make trading easier to a trader who has accepted that difficulty is not the obstacle, it is the path. Let's go deep. Part 1. The fantasy of trading. Most people enter trading with invisible expectations. They do not write them down. They do not examine them. They do not even fully articulate them to themselves, but they are there, operating beneath the surface, shaping every emotional response to every outcome. The invisible expectations sound something like this. If I study hard enough, I will figure this out. If I put in the hours, I will see results. If I find the right strategy, consistency will follow. If I am disciplined enough, I will be profitable within a reasonable time frame. These beliefs feel reasonable. They are the same beliefs that have worked in every other domain where effort and dedication produced results. Education, career, physical training, creative skills. In all of these, sustained effort moves the performance curve in a predictable direction. Better inputs produce better outputs. More study produces more knowledge. More practice produces more skill. The relationship between effort and result is reliable enough to build expectations around. But trading does not operate on that model. Not fully. Because trading is not just skill acquisition, it's psychological adaptation to an environment that is fundamentally uncertain, structurally random in the short term, and specifically designed to exploit the mental patterns that effort and discipline training instill. Pattern recognition, sharpened by study, becomes overconfidence when applied to probabilistic events. Certainty, built by preparation, becomes the need for certainty that causes hesitation when the market refuses to provide it. Discipline, developed through habit, becomes rigidity when the market requires acceptance of outcomes outside the trader's control. Every strength that effort-based learning develops can become a liability in an uncertainty-based environment, and most traders enter that environment without knowing this. They bring their effort, their dedication, their expectation of proportional reward, and they find a market that doesn't care about any of it. That shock, the shock of correct effort producing incorrect outcomes, is the beginning of the emotional cost that most trading education never prepares anyone for. Part 2. The neuroscience. Why the effort-reward mismatch hurts. Let's go inside the brain. Because the frustration that traders experience when effort does not produce expected results is not simple disappointment. It is a neurological response to a fundamental violation of the brain's core operating model. The brain is built around what neuroscientists call the effort-reward model. Effort expended in pursuit of a goal activates the dopamine anticipation system. The brain releases dopamine in anticipation of the reward that effort is expected to produce. This anticipatory dopamine is what motivates sustained effort. It creates the feeling of engagement, purpose, and momentum that drives learning and skill development. And when effort produces the expected reward, when studying leads to better grades, when practice leads to improved performance, the dopamine system is satisfied. The model is confirmed. Effort produces reward. But when effort does not produce the expected reward, when correct preparation leads to losing trades, when disciplined execution leads to drawdowns, when sustained study does not accelerate the path to consistency, the dopamine anticipation is unmet. The reward was expected. It did not arrive, and this unmet expectation produces a specific neurological response: frustration. Not the mild frustration of a delayed reward, the deeper frustration of a violated model. The brain's core operating assumption that effort and outcome are reliably linked has been contradicted by the evidence, and the brain does not accept that contradiction quietly. It generates increasing pressure to restore the model, to find the additional effort that will produce the expected reward, to identify the mistake in the approach that explains the unexpected outcome, to make the environment conform to the expectation rather than accepting that the environment operates differently. This is why traders respond to trading difficulty by studying more, changing systems, adding indicators, increasing screen time. Not because those responses are likely to solve the problem, because the brain is executing its standard protocol for effort-reward mismatches. Increase effort, adjust approach, restore the model. But in trading, the model itself is the problem. Effort and outcome are not reliably linked in the short term. They are linked probabilistically over a large sample, and the brain's effort-reward model has no framework for probabilistic linkage. It expects direct causation, and it generates distress when it finds probability instead. Part 3. The emotional cost of trading. Trading demands a specific set of emotional capacities that are not developed by any other profession or life experience. The first is patience under uncertainty. Not the patience of waiting for a known outcome, the patience of waiting when the outcome is genuinely unknown and may remain unknown indefinitely. This is different from the patience required to complete a project where the endpoint is defined. It is the patience of sitting with open-ended uncertainty and not resolving it through action. Most people have never developed this capacity because most environments reward the reduction of uncertainty through action. In trading, acting to reduce uncertainty creates worse outcomes than tolerating it. The second is discipline under pressure. Not the discipline of following rules when following rules is easy, the discipline of following rules when every emotional signal is demanding deviation, when the stop is approaching and the body wants to widen it, when the session has been difficult and the mind wants to recover, when the previous trade was a loss and the ego wants to prove it wrong. This is discipline at its hardest, and it is what trading requires consistently, not occasionally, every session. The third is equanimity during losses, not the absence of loss aversion, the ability to feel the sting of a loss without allowing that sting to distort the next decision, to process the negative experience and return to a neutral baseline before the next trade. In real time, under the ongoing pressure of a live market. Most people have no training for this because most environments that produce losses, sports, business, relationships, allow time for recovery. Trading allows seconds. The fourth is humility during wins, the capacity to win without believing the win is evidence of superiority, to profit without becoming overconfident, to succeed without relaxing the standards that produced the success.
This is perhaps the rarest emotional capacity in trading, because winning feels like permission to do more of what produced the win, and doing more of what produced the win is usually the fastest path to giving it back. Each of these capacities is difficult. Each takes years to develop. Each is tested constantly, and most traders begin trading with none of them developed, which is why the emotional cost of trading is so much higher than anyone anticipates, and why that cost, not the technical challenge, is what breaks most traders before they reach consistency.
Part 4. The Hidden Timeline Problem. Most traders carry a secret expectation about how long development should take. They do not write it down. They would not defend it if asked directly. But it shapes every emotional response to their progress. And the secret expectation is almost always too aggressive. A few months in, they expect to feel more confident than they do. A year in, they expect to see more consistency than they have. After a losing streak, they expect to recover faster than feels possible. After a winning period, they expect the improvement to be permanent. When reality does not match these invisible timelines, when progress is slower, more nonlinear, more difficult than the expectation allows for, disappointment arrives. And disappointment in trading is not just emotional, it is behavioral. Disappointed traders modify their systems looking for faster progress. They compare their timeline to others who appear to be developing more quickly. They interpret normal variance as evidence of personal inadequacy. They question whether the effort is justified. They consider quitting. Not because trading isn't working, because it is not working on the timeline they secretly required. The reality of trading development is uncomfortable but important. Genuine consistency, the kind that persists across different market conditions and psychological states, typically takes several years of dedicated development to build. Not months, not a year, years. During which progress is nonlinear. During which losing periods feel like regression. During which the skills being built are largely invisible until the moment they are tested under pressure and hold. Most traders never reach this timeline, not because they lack the ability, because the emotional cost of the journey exceeds what their invisible expectations prepared them for. And when reality exceeds the expected cost, when trading is harder and slower than anticipated, the rational response feels like quitting. When the actual correct response is recalibrating the expectation, accepting the real timeline, and continuing. Part 5. The Identity Shock. Trading exposes weakness. This is one of its most uncomfortable and most valuable characteristics. The market is a mirror, and what it reflects back is not what the trader expected to see. Impulsiveness, fear, ego, impatience, need for control, need for validation, inability to tolerate uncertainty, tendency to break under sustained pressure. These are not character flaws unique to struggling traders. They are human tendencies that every trader carries. But most environments do not expose them this directly or this consistently. Most environments allow the ego to maintain a curated self-image. Trading does not, because every decision is on record. Every deviation from the plan is visible in the equity curve. Every emotional response to pressure is documented in the trade history. And the trader who believed they were disciplined, patient, and rational is confronted with evidence that under specific market conditions, they are none of those things.
That confrontation, the identity shock of discovering that the version of yourself you brought to trading is not the version required, is one of the most psychologically demanding experiences in the profession. Most people expected to learn charts. They were not prepared to be forced to learn themselves. And learning yourself genuinely, honestly, through the evidence of your own behavior under pressure is a far more demanding process than learning any technical skill. Because it requires not just acknowledging weakness, but sitting with it. Not just identifying where discipline breaks, but continuing to show up at the desk where it broke. Not just understanding that fear drives certain decisions, but making the correct decision anyway while the fear is present. That is the identity development that trading demands, and most traders underestimate it entirely.
Part 6. Why most traders quit. People rarely quit trading because the opportunity is not real. The opportunity is real. The edge is achievable. The skill is learnable. They quit because the emotional cost of the journey exceeded what they were prepared to pay. The stress accumulated beyond what felt sustainable. The frustration of slow progress exceeded what felt justified. The repeated exposure of personal weakness exceeded what felt tolerable. And at some point, often not dramatically but quietly, the emotional account ran dry before the financial account did. That is the real reason most traders quit. Not failure, exhaustion. Psychological exhaustion from an endeavor that asked more of them emotionally than any previous experience had. And the tragedy is that many of these traders were closer to genuine consistency than they knew. That the identity development trading forced on them had built real psychological capacity. That the skills developed through difficulty were genuinely present. But the exhaustion arrived before the consistency did, because the emotional cost was never properly anticipated, never budgeted for, never treated as the primary challenge it actually is. Part 7. Lessons from professional traders. One principle shared consistently among experienced traders who have reached genuine long-term consistency is this: stop trying to make trading easier, start trying to become more capable of handling what trading already is. This shift from reducing the difficulty to increasing the capacity is the foundation of professional psychological development in trading. The amateur seeks to reduce friction, to find the setup that always works, the time frame that is less stressful, the approach that requires less emotional management. The professional accepts the friction. They stop asking when trading will become easier. They start asking what needs to develop within them to handle what trading already is. That is a completely different project, and it is the correct one. Another principle observed among traders who have navigated the full emotional arc of trading development: the difficulty is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something real is being built. Genuine psychological capacity, the kind that allows clean execution under sustained pressure, is not built in comfortable conditions. It is built in exactly the conditions trading provides. Repeated exposure to uncertainty, repeated testing of discipline under pressure, repeated confrontation with personal weakness, repeated requirement to act correctly despite fear. Each of these experiences, uncomfortable, expensive, often humbling, is building the emotional infrastructure that consistent trading requires. The difficulty is not the obstacle, it is the construction process. Part 8. Practical tools for managing the emotional cost. The first tool is the expectation audit. Write down honestly what you expected trading to feel like at your current stage of development. Then, write down what it actually feels like. The gap between those two descriptions is the source of most of the emotional cost you are currently experiencing. Not the difficulty itself, the distance between the expected difficulty and the actual difficulty. Once that gap is identified, it can be addressed. Not by making trading easier, by recalibrating the expectation. By replacing the fantasy timeline with a realistic one. And by measuring progress against the realistic timeline rather than the fantasy one. The second tool is the emotional cost budget. Before every trading week, acknowledge explicitly that the week will have emotional costs. Not as a pessimistic prediction, as a realistic preparation. Write down the specific emotional challenges the week is likely to produce: difficult sessions, losing trades, drawdown periods, moments of doubt, moments of frustration. Acknowledging them in advance removes the element of surprise that amplifies their impact. What is expected is less destabilizing than what is unexpected. And a destabilization that was anticipated can be navigated more cleanly than one that arrives as a shock. The third tool is the difficulty reframe. When trading feels hard, when the emotional cost is high and the progress feels slow, ask one question: what is this difficulty building in me? Not as a motivational exercise, as a genuine inquiry. Because the answer is usually specific. This period of slow progress is building patience. This losing streak is building equanimity. This identity confrontation is building self-awareness. This sustained pressure is building execution consistency under conditions that would have broken me 6 months ago. The difficulty has a product. Identifying the product transforms the experience from pointless suffering to purposeful development, and purposeful development is sustainable in a way that pointless suffering is not. The fourth tool is the longitudinal progress review. Every month, review not your financial performance, but your psychological performance. Compare how you respond to losing trades now versus 6 months ago. Compare how you manage pressure now versus a year ago. Compare your patience, your discipline, your equanimity across time rather than against an external benchmark. This review reveals something that session-by-session evaluation never shows: growth. Real, measurable, documented psychological growth that is often invisible when evaluated against short-term financial results, but becomes undeniable when evaluated against your own historical behavior. That evidence of growth, your own evidence from your own trading, is the most powerful source of sustainable motivation in this profession, because it proves the difficulty is working, that something is being built, that the emotional cost is not waste, it is investment.
Closing. Trading was never going to be easy. Not technically, and certainly not psychologically. It was always going to ask more of you than you expected, more patience than you thought you had, more discipline than felt sustainable, more self-confrontation than felt comfortable, more time than felt justified. That is not a flaw in the endeavor. It is the structure of it. The psychological cost is not separate from the trading. It is the trading. Every moment of sustained discipline is the trading. Every correct decision made despite fear is the trading. Every loss absorbed without behavioral change is the trading. Every session completed without deviation from the plan is the trading. The chart is just where it happens. The real work, the work that determines whether you eventually reach consistency, is the psychological development that the chart forces. And that development takes time. More time than the fantasy expected. Less time than quitting allows. The traders who succeed are not the ones who found a way to make the journey easier. They are the ones who accepted that the journey is exactly as hard as it needs to be, and kept showing up anyway, not because it was comfortable, because they understood that the difficulty was not the obstacle between them and trading success. It was the path to it. Keep going. Your growth as a trader begins with self-awareness. The rest follows. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, control your mind.